Hello, boys and girls. It is late at night, and once again, we have another kind of late night musing here, another theme that I wanted to discuss. It's about historical films, period films, and some of the more horrific aspects of them if they're not full blown horror films, which, many of, the ones that I am going to talk about, they are to some extent. But it's more so about how period films, to whatever degree, they often, I think, are there to help teach us something about the horrors of history and about where we are in the particular point of history in which we find ourselves. And I bring this up specifically because I'm currently on the precipice of starting a new job, which I am immensely thankful for. I've had kind of a rough go of it since November, as I'm sure a lot of people have, at least since the full advent of the coronavirus. But for me, I got a jump start on it early with, my fiance decided she didn't want to get married anymore. I moved out of my old apartment. I sold a lot of my possessions. And then in March, I lost my job, like a lot of people did. And, I've been looking for one ever since. And, I managed to finally find the right one. And my first day is tomorrow. And as I sit here on the precipice of that great event, I reflect on how we're at a period in history where we feel like like for many of us, this is as bad as we could conceive of it. A lot of us, we think about, zombie apocalypses, and we think about, that's about as bad as it could get, or like, these kinds of scenarios are becoming realities. But we're also so heavily inundated with films about potential apocalypses, whether they're zombie or not, um, that we kind of think in those paradigms. But then, if we are not sufficiently educated in our history, then we will think about how what we kind of often forget about the things that we have that people facing similar or worse crises didn't have. Like, I'm speaking into an electronic device right now that will go and be uploaded to the internet, which people just a few decades ago, let alone centuries ago, let alone millennia ago, could not have even remotely conceived of. Back in the times of good old Spartacus here, they were dealing with, slavery in, this massive, Roman Empire, and, you had crucifixions that were regular fixtures of, well, public spectacle, as well as, methods of execution. And, you had just the concepts of personhood. They weren't what we think of today. And even as recently as the 1800s, we have had to deal with differing concepts of personhood and concepts of slavery and of, the horrors that we humans can inflict upon each other. Now, we certainly do, still have societal problems today when it comes to mental illness, and it comes to the, the gap between rich and poor, and, things like that. And of course, these days, the big health scare is, the big worry is the health scares like this coronavirus. But, the question that you, I guess, have to ask yourself is, when it comes to the times that we're in, like, you think about a film like Apocalypto, this excellent, all these films I'm recommending to you, you should watch, but, you think about a film like this, and this was at a time when the Mayan civilization was kind of consuming itself prior to the advent of, the Spanish coming and the Portuguese coming to the Central and South American continents. and I think this was actually filmed in the Yucatan, so that's technically Mexico. But you think about that, and you think about how their world, was rapidly coming to an end in a very, very real way. And as bad as as bad as these current times are, we're nowhere near this level of societal collapse. And the mere fact that I can record this, that I have electric light, that is illuminating me, so I can speak to my electronic device, so it can get uploaded to this thing known as the internet, that people in this time, whether they were the Mayans or the Spanish or anyone, they could never have conceived of such a thing. That's a miracle. That is, but basically the whole point of this is, when you can use historical films that cover specific periods in history, whether they're relatively recent, very contemporary, or centuries or millennia old. All of these things can teach us a little something about what all we have relative to what people in times past, what they didn't have, and how even as bad as things are now, they could be so much worse. And even if you faced job loss or personal loss of some kind, or a great upending, life change, as myself and as so many people have during this time, maybe we've even lost somebody thanks to the virus or thanks to some other reason. It's always important to look at our history through history books or through historical films, and because it's indie horror film creative, we can look at something like The Witch, which is a horror film, but it's also a historical film in the sense that these were people, early settlers of New England, that came over to this new land where they had very little but themselves and their faith and their just tenacity to try and live off of this land that wasn't bearing fruit, that wasn't being hospitable to them in any way. And every day could be a day that they died, or they faced some kind of horrible disease that they had no hope of recovering from, or just you put yourself in that mindset. And again, this is through a horror lens, of course, but you put yourself in that mindset, or you think about, like, the Revenant here. You think about the early fur traders and explorers, and you think about the harshness of the elements, or the fact that, like, when Leonardo DiCaprio as Hugh Glass, when he gets mauled by the bear, it's like it's a miracle he didn't just die right then and there on the spot, and he has to crawl his way through the wilderness, and it's like, as you can tell, I'm a fan of films that have to deal with elements of survival or people having to overcome extreme situations. I think that makes good drama. But it's something that it's important for all of us to kind of put ourselves in that mindset. And then we think about how, again, even as bad as things are now, not having toilet paper at our disposal right away, or having to buy having to buy less of it than we would like, or having to be judicious with our, supply of food and things like that. We could be in so much worse situations, and having to stay at home, or having to be more conscientious with ourselves and our health and our cleanliness, all of that stuff, that all of those things pale in comparison to what people in these time periods, in these situations, facing these kinds of insurmountable odds, what all they had to go through every day just to get through a day, let alone their lives. And I think that it's really important for all of us to remember just how much we stand to lose with not only our lives, but just our ability to take our existence for granted. Just the fact that we even these days have the chance or the ability to do that is far more than people just a few decades or a few centuries ago could have had. Like you think, or even like in something as extreme as like Sallow, for example, like this is set in fascist Italy, which wasn't even all that long ago in historical terms. And again, it was a book written in the 1700s, so but it's transplanted to fascist Italy. But this kind of situation, as extreme as it is, with the rich and powerful being able to hold the young and innocent to their pleasure, and make them suffer for their pleasure, make them suffer horrifically. It's like we, to this day, there are child soldiers, there are sexual slavery exists, there's immeasurable suffering in the world. And, we think about how, we have to stay home or we can't socialize or we have to abide by these social distancing protocols. And my point is that, in times past and in contemporary times, things were immeasurably worse and remain immeasurably worse than that. So the more that we study and keep ourselves in the mindset of these periods in our history and how the films about these periods, the good ones, how they're able to serve as an entree for us to be able to feel on some level and experience on some vicarious level what it was like to not have antibiotics, not to know what disease even really is. Like for thousands of years, people, believed in like spontaneous generation. And, in the time of Spartacus, they never would have had any conception of viruses. So I mean, every day that we're above ground, every day that we have breath in our lungs, even if that to take that breath is painful at times, whether like physically or emotionally painful because of things that have happened to us, every day above ground is a day that's worth it. And we can succumb to depravity, we can succumb to madness, we can become nihilistic, we as mad and nihilistic as Caligula. We can indulge in our own suffering or indulge in the suffering of others in extreme cases. We can succumb to the madness, shall we say, or we can choose to take the suffering of our lives in whatever capacity that we've experienced it, some more than others, but all of us have. Suffering's inevitable. We can choose to take those aspects of our suffering and remind ourselves that, tomorrow the sun will rise. Each day is a day to make things right again. Each day is a day to have things turn out better than they were yesterday, and especially given what all we have today in the way of science, technology, information, the ability to connect to other people. It's like we magically remembered that we have this miraculous technology that allows us to see each other across vast distances and to hear each other's voices, when in just a few centuries ago people had to use the Pony Express to get a letter sent, and that would take weeks or months at fastest. And we think about how it takes overly long to get our packages sent to us. I mean, we can just, it's important, like especially in the case of the Elephant Man, Joseph Merrick, who for some reason is called John Merrick in this film. I never understood why. You think about someone like him, who was deformed, who had nothing, less than nothing, and was thought of as a monster. And you think about how someone like that could have the kind of spirit and heart that he had amidst all of that suffering and amidst the cruel hand that life dealt him, and that he could fight for his humanity and his own ability to feel happiness and meaning in his life. And that was a real person. And then you think about my favorite film of all time, City Lights, about this person, the little tramp who is put down by society and is, no one wants anything to do with him, and there's virtually no one in his life that is on his side, and yet he's able to maintain his dignity and to persevere amidst all the suffering and do something unbelievably selfless and kind for someone that also has not had a good hand dealt to her. She's blind and she's not well off in any way, and yet he's able to do an unbelievably selfless thing for her. And all of us have the capacity to do that, and especially during these times. And you do see examples of people doing just that, people being selfless and being caring to each other. And it shouldn't take a crisis like this to get us to do that for each other. But again, it's like, and this was in 1931, this was the Great Depression, and we're approaching a crisis, an economic crisis that's going to be, as they're saying, as bad as the Great Depression. But if you can have someone in fiction or in a real life story of someone like this who can find themselves, find their meaning, find their ability to show love for one another in the midst of all that suffering, then that can counter all of the horrors that life can possibly inflict upon you in whatever capacity. No matter what cross you have to bear in life, there is a way to get out of that situation if you persevere. And that's why these are probably my two favorite films of all time, and why it is so important to keep that perspective. And films that deal in any kind of period in history can help us to keep that proper perspective. So yeah, I didn't mean to quite sermonize as much as it may have appeared. These are just things that had been on my mind for some time, especially as I'm coming to an end of a very hard period in my life, and I know so many people who have gone through similarly hard periods in their lives, some people I know very personally. And this is just a way to say, through the medium that those of us watching hopefully love as much as I do, that this medium that we purport to love can do so much to help show us where we've been as a species, as a race of people, and where we have yet to go, and what all we can contribute to the world in some way through our art and through our abilities to treat each other well and decently. But yes, I just thank you to everyone who has watched the episodes thus far, and thank you to all those who have been here for me during this very hard period in my life, as I'm sure that it has been the case for many of you out there. If you have any similar stories to tell, feel free to let me know in the comments. Any particular historical films, whether they're horror or any genre, that taught you something or made you count your blessings, which that's really what I would sum this video up as, is count your blessings. Be thankful for every day, even if it was a bad day. Just tell me your story and what these stories from history, whether fictional or a representation of a real person's life, what they meant to you. And so yeah, if you like this, if this connected with you in some way, then please hit the like button and share, subscribe, hit the bell icon, Warp Factor 5, set phasers to stun, and I will be talking about this film that came in the mail on a lighter note that I was using to keep the tripod of sorts upright. But yeah, just hopefully this connected with you in some way. I know it was therapeutic for me to get all this off my chest, but yeah, I'll see you in the next video, and just continue to keep safe.